All right, now we're jumping more into the kid side of things. So if you got a kid, were once a kid, you might want to check out this video and learn about trauma and ADHD. Hi y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, hey there, welcome. My name is Jessica Lang. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and this here is the Survivor's Guide to Life, where I talk all things related to trauma, the brain, and healing. So if that's your jam, go ahead and click that subscribe button down below so you can be notified every time I upload a new video. While you're at it, head on over to Instagram. Follow me over on Instagram where I post more tips, tricks, day-to-day functioning mental health, mental wellness type topics to get you through life. I'm also trying to get to that magical 10,000 follower subscriber account so I can get the swipe up feature and connect my YouTube with my Instagram and make things all nice and neat and pretty the way I like them and organized also the way I like them. So you'd be helping me out greatly. Alright, so shameless plug is over, and today I am going to talk about attention deficit disorder and how it relates to trauma, how ADHD can look like trauma, or how trauma can look like ADHD, whatever way works for you, and how, especially in children, trauma is not taken into account as much, and the trauma can actually be misdiagnosed or missed out entirely. Before I read to you what attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is, I'm going to say that within the DSM-V, which is the current edition of the DSM, as of right now when I'm reading this diagnosis and having this conversation with you, it is under the category of what we call neurodevelopmental disorders. So these are typically things that you will start to see present in very young children that we believe, we mental health professionals, we researchers in the neuropsychology, neurophysiology, neurobiology field of things, we'll see like having to do with like changes in the brain. So also in this category, you're going to look at your autism spectrum disorders and your developmental disability disorders. Like that all fits into this category. Attention deficit / hyperactivity disorder. A persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity / impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development, as characterized by one and or two. Number one, inattention. 6 or more of the following symptoms have persisted for at least 6 months to a degree that is inconsistent with developmental level and that negatively impacts directly on social and academic / occupational activities. Note, the symptoms are not solely a manifestation of manifestations of oppositional behavior, defiance, hostility, or failure to understand tasks or instructions. For older adolescents and adults aged 17 and older, at least 5 symptoms are required. A. Often fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes in schoolwork, at work, or during other activities. Overlooks or misses details. Work is inaccurate. B. Often has difficulty sustaining attention in tasks or play activities. Has difficulty remaining focused during lectures, conversations, or lengthy reading. C. Often does not seem to listen when spoken to directly. Mind seems elsewhere, even in the absence of an obvious distraction. So if you are somebody who is struggling with anxiety, or you have some trauma, right, and you are scanning your environment for the threat, so you have some hypervigilance, or you are having some ruminating thoughts about your past traumas or like intrusive memories happening at this time, you are going to look like you're not paying attention when directly spoken to. Also noting with folks with trauma, again, because they're so sensitized to threats in their environment, especially for children, that an adult's presence who comes off in an authoritative way might trigger that fear response that then sends all the signals like you're unsafe, this is dangerous, and so they become, the stress response system's mechanisms start to kick in, and they may also look like they're not paying attention when really they're actually in a fight, fight, freeze response that's happening. So that's like our first indication here of how you can see how it's easily, it can easily one can be misconstrued for the other. D. Often does not follow through on instructions and fails to finish schoolwork, chores, or duties in the workplace. Starts tasks but quickly loses focus and is easily sidetracked. For this D, see this also with folks who have bipolar disorder. They get real gung-ho about something and then they like lose interest and they're on to the next thing. E, often has difficulty organizing tasks and activities, difficulty managing sequential tasks, difficulty keeping materials and belongings in order, messy, disorganized work, has poor time management, fails to meet deadlines. F, often avoids, dislikes, or is reluctant to engage in tasks that require sustained mental effort, schoolwork or homework. For older adolescents and adults, preparing reports, completing forms, reviewing lengthy papers. This F can also be seen with in anxiety disorders, and also with folks who struggle with low self-esteem and like some of that perfectionism stuff. So again, when you're looking at these diagnoses and why, like, you know, as amazing as like WebMD or like you can look this all up online, you needing to know the nuances of the behavior, like where it's coming from, what the etiology is, to kind of give you a broader picture of what's going on, what it stems from. Is it really based off of like the way an ADHD brain works with the scattered attention, and you know, or is it something related to anxiety or perfectionism or fear or worry about performance, and that's why you're unable to complete tasks or reports or what have you, or because the subject is boring and there's no payoff or no benefit to finishing it, you know, or external reward that you benefit from. G, often loses things necessary for tasks or activities, school materials, pencils, books, tools, wallets, keys, paperwork, eyeglasses, mobile phones, etc. H, is often easily distracted by extraneous stimuli. For older adolescents and adults, may include unrelated thoughts. Again, see this one with trauma, right? I, is often forgetful in daily activities, doing chores, running errands. For older adults and adolescents, returning phone calls, paying bills, keeping appointments. Again, we'll see that with PTSD also. So again, you're looking at what's underlying these behaviors. What is the etiology? Is it because you're in a trauma response and you're unable to move from like task A to task B, or is it really like purely something organic that's going on? Hyperactivity and impulsivity. 6 or more of the following symptoms have persisted for at least 6 months to a degree that is inconsistent with developmental level and that negatively impacts directly on social and academic occupational activities. Note, the symptoms are not solely a manifestation of oppositional behavior, defiance, hostility, or failure to understand tasks or instructions. For older adolescents and adults aged 17 and older, at least 5 symptoms are required. A, often fidgets with or taps hands or feet or squirms in seat. See this again with trauma, or with somebody who's having issues with sensory integration, which is also common with trauma, but it can also exist on its own. So if you have trouble with integrating sensory information, or you're anxious, being able to like move around, you know, with like sensory stuff, inability to like feel grounded or feel where your body is in space, like having difficulty feeling where your body is in space as a result of like some sensory integration or sensory processing stuff, can look like this also. B, often leaves seat in situations where remaining seated is expected, leaves his or her place in the classroom, in office or other workplace, or in other situations that require remaining in place. C, often runs about or climbs in situations where it is inappropriate. No, in adolescents or adults, may be limited to feeling restless. D, often unable to play or engage in leisure activities quietly. E, is often on the go, acting as if driven by a motor, is unable to be or uncomfortable being still for extended time, as in restaurants, meetings, may be experienced by others as restless or difficulty to keep up with. F, often talks excessively. G, often blurts out an answer before a question has been completed. H, often has difficulty waiting his or her turn. I, often interrupts or intrudes on others, butts into conversations, games, or activities, may start using other people's things without asking or receiving permission. For adolescents and adults, may intrude into or take over what others are doing. B, several inattentive or hyperactive impulsive symptoms were present prior to age 12. C, several inattentive or hyperactivity impulsive symptoms are present in 2 or more settings, at home, school, or work, with friends or relatives in other activities. This C is so crucial because oftentimes kids will have issues solely at school, but at home they're fine. or you only see the behaviors at home but you don't see them at school. This one I actually see a lot. Like many kids can like kind of hold it together at school, which is the one place if a child truly has ADHD, they cannot keep it, like they can't keep it together at school. But I'll see this, they can't keep it together at home, but at school it's like there's no issues at all. And what I have found in my experience is that it often has to do with a combination of what's socially acceptable to do at school, especially for older children, but also what the expectations that are placed on a child at school, which aren't placed at home, are not reinforced at home. And so the person may look like they have ADHD, but really it's like a failure of expectations, or like of setting expectations. D. There is clear evidence that the symptoms interfere with or reduce the quality of social, academic, or occupational functioning. E. The symptoms do not occur exclusively during the course of schizophrenia or another psychotic disorder and are not better explained by another mental disorder, mood disorder, anxiety disorder, dissociative disorder, personality disorder, substance intoxication, or withdrawal. So you can have some specifiers: combined presentation, predominantly with inattentive presentation, predominantly hyperactivity or impulsive presentation. You can have partial remission. You can have severities be mild or moderate or severe. So that's an ADHD diagnosis. Pretty cut and dry. One of the standards and my biggest recommendation, if you think you are struggling with ADHD or you think your child has ADHD, take them to a psychologist. So that's somebody who's a Ph.D. or a Psy.D., who's licensed, obviously, who can give them a full battery of tests, and find somebody who specializes specifically in ADHD and ADHD to do it, because they're the ones who do psychological testing. Like people like myself, marriage and family therapists, licensed clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors. We actually, in our training, we cannot do specific psychological assessments. There's some that we can do, but for the most part, when it comes to like psych assessments, you're looking for somebody with a Ph.D. or a Psy.D. because they're the ones who can do it. Even psychiatrists don't do psych assessments or psych evals. They also are called psychological evaluations. So you're looking for a Ph.D. who can do this. They'll see them, and typically what's also nice about it too is like the person who does the psych evaluation / psych testing is not going to treat them. So they're going to come and they're going to see this person through like this brand new, different eyes, different lens. They see them over multiple sessions. They'll see them or hear about them in, if they're good, be able to assess them in different environments so that they can see get a whole picture, and they'll do these tests and they'll be able to give you a better answer on whether you have ADHD or ADD. I feel like that's my biggest recommendation. If you really are struggling, don't just walk into your doctor's office and be like, this is what, I read all the symptoms of ADHD online and I think I have ADHD, because they'll put you on a stimulant. And that, again, you're talking about drugs that they're working in your brain. It's messing with connections and wires and hormones and neurotransmitters that are in your brain. And if you don't truthfully have ADHD, like if you don't have ADD, then you're basically taking meth. It's not meth, but meth is a stimulant in the same way that these that the drugs that treat ADHD, that it's the same category of meds. And so like your Adderall, and so I couldn't remember the names of them because like it's Adderall, like it's the same compound, you just change like one little thing here or there. It's all in the stimulant category of things. And so if you don't truly have ADHD, then you are gonna, it's going to affect you in the same way that meth affects a person who's on substance abuse. But if you truly have ADHD, it actually does the opposite. It curbs some of those impulses. It slows the person down, right? So that's why it's important to really get a full battery of those tests by a licensed professional, who can also sit down and talk to you about, ways that you don't have to take meds. That's the other thing. You don't actually have to take meds. There's different severity types. There's ways that like the classroom environment or your work environment can be made to accommodate your needs, so you don't have to take medication. If you don't want to take medication, that's your choice, that's your right. So again, you can sit down with the psychologist who says, yes, you know, you have ADHD. These are the things that you can do. This is how we can help. And then they can give you the tools, and you can practice like using them so that you can function and be happy and healthy. Because a lot of, especially adults with ADHD, struggle with like low self-esteem, because, you know, our environment is not like, our working environment, our school environments are not conducive. They're not necessarily supportive in and of themselves. We're people who are struggling with ADHD, and so you can feel like really alone and not so great about yourself, and you know you want to do all these things, maybe, you know, academically, you know, you really like school, but you find it really hard to focus, whatever, you know. And so being able to like figure out what your needs are and get those accommodations is really helpful. And then also socially, you know, the earlier that it's diagnosed and it's treated, like, you can learn these tools from an early age. It becomes part of like your ingrained knowledge, as opposed to like you've learned all these bad habits, or, you know, things that are not conducive, and then you have to unlearn them in order to replace them. Like, that's more of like balagan. You don't really want that. Sorry, I spoke a little Hebrew. That just means like messy, crazy, out of order. So you can so that's the importance of like just going ahead and getting that treatment. You, again, if you're a parent, you're worried they're gonna put my kid on meds, like, it's your choice. If whether you want your child on medication too, there's accommodations that can be made. A lot of sensory stuff that, you know, I use with my clients who have trauma, people who have like autism or sensory integration, sensory processing issues. A lot of those types of tips and tricks also work for people who have ADHD. So that's why it's good to get like a formal diagnosis, and, you know, get somebody who knows what they're doing to work with you and help advocate for you, or advocate for your child on what their needs are. And like an IEP, again, especially as a parent, you can call for an IEP. That's an individualized education plan, and districts hate paying for it. But if it's your right legally, if you say, I want my kids to have an IEP, they have to do it. You put it in writing that the school districts have to do it, and they'll pay for all of the services. So they'll have the psychologist come, and they'll look at what's going on with your child. They'll determine whether they, you know, what their needs are, and then you're not having to pay out of pocket. They'll get their services. They can get their therapy there on school campuses. I've worked as a school therapist before, so like I've sat in IEP meetings. I know how they go. They're interesting. The reports are long. But again, if you're like, you don't have you don't have the money for, because psychologists are expensive. They're more expensive than like an MFT or a social worker, a licensed social worker. Not as expensive as a psychiatrist, but, well, whatever. I don't know why I'm going off on a tangent about that. It has nothing to do with it. But they're expensive, and so you might feel like, oh man, like I can't afford to pay for like these barrier tests. If you think your child is struggling with ADD, or the teacher mentions, hey, maybe your child, say, okay, let's get them an IEP. Let's get somebody in to look at them, and then the district has to pay for it. So yay. I mean, that's your tax dollars though, right? Like, you're paying for it, so they should come in and like help you out and like do the accommodations. And most schools now have a therapist, to have somebody on site who can help your child. And you might even be able to get like an aide or what, you know, there's all kinds of accommodations that can be made. But first step, if you're, you know, is to get that assessment done. So you can do it by calling for an IEP at your child's school, where they do the assessments, or you can just pay out of pocket, go to a private psychologist, ask to do an ADHD assessment or psychological evaluation, looking to see if your child has ADD or ADHD. If you have a family history of ADHD, people in your family have been diagnosed, like in your immediate family, mom, brother, sister, dad, grandparents, whatever, on either side have a history of ADHD, your child's more likely to get ADHD, or I don't know why I say get, more likely to have ADHD. So again, like, that's one way you can also tell. Again, there's some overlap with trauma and ADD, but the biggest thing that gets mistaken is that an ADD child is hyperactive. They have difficulty with emotional regulation. They do have trouble with impulsivity. And those are also things that somebody with a trauma, with a history of trauma or disrupted attachment, so that they are anxious with adults, or they, what's the word I'm looking for? They're hypervigilant, you know, scanning their environments. They're going to be more hyperactive. They're going to be more impulsive in their behavior. So being able to take like a detailed history, if you have any trauma, if you live in it, and I said this in another video, with my clients who live in poorer neighborhoods, who typically are, you know, have brown skin, they're the ones who are overdiagnosed for ADHD. but they live in these dangerous environments where they're constantly keyed up and on edge because they're scanning their environments for threats of safety, looking for, their survival adaptations are, what's being developed and heightened. And so their educational ones maybe are not as fine-tuned, so they might be bored in class, and then one of the things we do when a child is disruptive in class, we send them out of the room, so then they get out of it, right? So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's important to take that detailed history. It's important to get all those variables, take them into account, seeing what the antecedents are. That'll give you more of an idea of what's going on. With ADHD, it's more organic. You'll see it kind of, over the course of a child's little life. They won't have a trauma diagnosis, or if they do, you can have ADHD and you can also have trauma, but just knowing that, you need to also look at the whole picture, not just this one set of symptoms, or they're, struggling really bad in school. Alright, so now it's your turn. Comment down below. Let me know your thoughts about ADHD, trauma. Is there anything that I missed? Something you wish I would have talked about further that maybe I didn't cover? Let me know. Comment down below. And with that, I will see you in the next one.